For more than 50 years, thousands of workers quarried, carved, and transported countless stones hundreds of kilometers across Japan. I'm here in downtown Tokyo, surrounded by these massive buildings and the subway. And there's this old stone wall that I don't think that many people are paying attention to, that really is part of the foundation of Tokyo. In 1945, Tokyo was bombed by Allied forces in the most destructive bombing campaign in world history. Over 100,000 people died, and huge portions of the city were leveled in just a single night. But even after centuries of fires, earthquakes, and devastating bombings, elements of the foundation of the city are still scattered around Tokyo. After opening an illegal amount of tabs on my computer, reaching out to experts, and reading what I could, I met up with a local tour guide to show me this place in person.
This is where I get excited the most. I have been here more than 100 times, but even now, if you ask some Japanese people living in Tokyo if there is a castle here in Tokyo or not, many people would say no.
The edges of the Pacific Ocean are where 80% of the world's earthquakes and 75% of the world's volcanoes occur. This is where several tectonic plates meet and is known as the Ring of Fire. And right here in the Ring of Fire is Japan. Because of this, the ground making up this island country is very active. The main volcano here is the famous Mount Fuji, reaching 3,776 meters into the sky. Just a few days ago, while working on this video, Tokyo had a relatively mild earthquake. But this is super common throughout Tokyo's history. Like in 2011, the 9.0 earthquake off the coast of Fukushima that caused a terribly destructive tsunami. But it's south from Fukushima, along the western coast, and tucked into Tokyo Bay, where the world's largest city sits. The city can be incredibly intimidating just because of its sheer size. So I wanted to find a center point of sorts and see if I could build from there. So that's why I began heading toward Nihonbashi Bridge. It's not the one at the top here, but the one tucked beneath it. This bridge behind me right here is Nihonbashi Bridge, and this bridge serves as like a 0 point for a lot of the roads in Japan because there's 5 main roads across Japan that are called the Gokaido, and this bridge is where all of them met. You're gonna have to forgive me for pronouncing a lot of these words wrong because I do not speak Japanese, but I'm gonna try my best here. But Nihonbashi translates to the Bridge of Japan. Thankfully, there's an info booth right by the bridge, so I stopped in, and this is where I met Amy. Why is it so important? What's the historic significance of it?
Have you ever heard the Edo?
Edo?
Period.
Mm-hmm. Rather than using BC and AD to reference time, Japanese history is divided into eras. These eras are typically defined by who was in charge. And 1603 kicked off the beginning of the Edo period, the same year this bridge was built. The Edo period marked a shift from years of war and political instability to a relatively stable and unified Japan that was very isolationist. And it's here that the story of Tokyo really begins. But it wasn't called Tokyo, it was called Edo.
日本橋は江戸時代にここから江戸の町を作るために町の中心として架けられた橋。
A symbol of the new unification of the country was the building of 5 roads across Japan. As a quick aside, they were originally lined with cedar trees, and in portions, those cedar trees are still there. Last year, I got to go to a portion of one of these roads in a different part of Japan, and the cedar trees were so big and so beautiful. And if you ever get the chance, highly recommend you check it out.
日本橋の真ん中には道路元標という印があります。道路元標は五街道、東海道、甲州街道、奥州街道、日光街道、中山道。
In 1603, when the bridge was built, this neighborhood right here took on the name of the bridge, Nihonbashi. But the bridge has been rebuilt over and over until the one that is there now, which was built in 1911. But the bridge that's currently here was here during World War II. And it was actually damaged in the bombing, and you can see some of the burn marks on the bridge still. On this map I'm using, it can be kind of hard to see the water that this bridge originally crossed because an expressway was built basically directly over top the water. The expressway that makes it very loud to film right here at Nihonbashi Bridge was built over it like right before the Olympics were held here in the 60s. And it's so disliked by the residents here that it was actually petitioned to be moved beneath the river. So in like 2040 or so, this is supposed to be moved officially below the river. And the classic view that they used to have of Mount Fuji from this bridge is hopefully going to be restored, except there's a lot of buildings around it, so I don't know if you'll actually be able to see Mount Fuji, but that's the idea. Since the construction of the expressway, the light post with the center marker was suspended between the roads so it could stay in its original location. But there's a problem with saying that this is definitively the center of the city.
ここが起点でゼロポイントとは言っているんですが、一応、ここから本当に測られているわけではないので、象徴。
So it's not really used for any geographical reference in modern Tokyo. So I met up with Mr. Takeda, who was my tour guide, and he took me to this big green space right here, not far west of the bridge.
This is the very center of Tokyo, even now.
Before the Edo period, this area was really nothing more than just a quiet fishing village. But if all of this stone was being brought to Edo, someone had to have enough power to persuade people, by whatever means, to drag these heavy stones for decades. That person was the shogun Tokugawa Ieyasu, and the stones were to build a castle unmatched in size.
This is the biggest castle in Japan.
This video was made possible because of today's sponsor, Nomadic. They just released a new line of backpacks, the Peter McKinnon Luma bags. This is their 18-liter sage-colored backpack. I've been using this whole trip, and it freaking rocks. And it holds way more than it might look. When I first got it, I was nervous if my 16-inch MacBook Pro would fit in it, but it has a laptop sleeve that fits it perfectly. Because it's in collaboration with Peter McKinnon, you know that every little detail on it is incredibly well thought through. It has a magnetic water bottle holder. It has top, back, and side access. It has a strap that you can connect it to your luggage. And all of this is in a very small, little sleek package that doesn't look like the super utilitarian backpack that you might think of when you think of the average camera backpack. They have great colors, and they're really sleek, and they're good for enthusiasts and professionals. The bag is super customizable. It comes with a bunch of dividing shelves you can put in there to fit whatever equipment you need to take with you, whether it's your film cameras or your video camera or your different lenses, whatever you need, you can organize it the way you want it. Nomadic is the whole reason this video is possible, and their link is in the description below, so please go show them some love and get yourself the new Luma bag or any of their other bags if you're planning on traveling. They have a bunch of gear that's super useful. Okay, back to the video about Tokyo. The street layout in Tokyo is way more irregular and complex than most Western cities. There's portions like this that seem to have a pretty strong grid pattern, but then there's other portions that seem completely irregular and have no pattern at all. This starts to make more sense though if we look closely at the waterways. This map shows them well. So my guide took me somewhere near the center here.
Today's people call this the Imperial Palace, but it used to be Edo Castle for more than 260 years.
The center of the castle was home to the shogun, and that made Edo the military capital of Japan at that time. And as for Nihonbashi River?
日本橋川は徳川の将軍がいる江戸城に魚とか塩とかを運ぶために作られた川。
So not only was this bridge built in the Edo period, but so was the river it crosses and the castle that river fed. But most of the waterways were created with more than just transport in mind.
It's a moat to protect from enemy, because this is a castle. The main purpose to build castle is to protect themselves from the enemy.
Over 20 kilometers of moat were built. Some sections are gone, but parts of the moat and its massive stone walls still scatter the city. a large portion of the streets in Tokyo have no name at all, which is totally foreign to me. But in the downtown areas, there are some streets with names, and often those names are very telling of what used to be there. For example, this street is called Sotobori-dori, which means Outer Moat Avenue. And this street is Uchibori-dori, which means Inner Moat Avenue. In my last video, I introduced the idea of palimpsest, which I was blasted for in the comments for pronouncing it wrong. Palimpsest, not palimpsest. I'm probably going to get that wrong again, but the reason I'm bringing that up is because I am standing at a spot where I can see this concept of palimpsest in front of me in real space, not just drawn on a map. This behind me is the last remaining gate of 3 that used to exist along the outer moat of Edo Castle. This map doesn't show every road, so it might be a little bit hard to see, but you can kind of tell that east of the castle is where these gridded roads are that tend to be more dense neighborhoods, while on the west side, it seems to be somewhat more spacious where these irregular patterns are. One good example of this is actually the neighborhood right here, which is Ginza. This is a pretty dense area, and many of the buildings in this neighborhood still take up the same lot space that they used to hundreds of years ago. So you get these really fancy buildings that are high-end brands that are very, very narrow. There are 2 connected, very interesting reasons why this city is sort of divided like this. And the reason is actually really revealing about the greater area of Tokyo, and it tells a little bit bigger of a story.
The place they used to live was divided by the class. There are more than 4 classes, like the pyramid, like this hierarchy, and then the upper ones are samurai, peasants or farmers come next, artisans or craftsmen come third, and the merchants comes the lowest. People often say that peasants or farmers are very important people, at least compared to the merchants, because merchants do not make anything. Without farmers, we cannot live. Without merchants, well, we can live somehow. Well, that is very Confucianistic way of thinking.
This caste system from the Edo period was a social structure that really impacted the layout of Tokyo's map in a way that we can still see today and even feel when we're on the ground. This swirl represents the moat system. And it's not quite this perfect, but when you look at maps with this in mind, it helps make a lot more sense of its pattern.
They call it honmaru. Hon means main maru, main circle. And Ninomaru, second circle, and Sannomaru, third circle.
So if you were a lower level merchant or a commoner, you would live in this area right here that's densely packed. But if you were in the military, if you were a samurai, you would live near the shogun and you'd have a bit more space. And if you were a lower level samurai, you'd be a little bit east of the shogun, since in feng shui that's considered the unlucky direction. So each caste had their own set place in the city. Another important aspect to this is that it was a castle city. The shogun actually required that everybody lived inside of the moats. And in fact, a lot of the samurais and the higher government officials were required to keep their families inside of Edo while they did their business elsewhere, sort of as hostages, so that they would have to come back to Edo to be with their family. So that kind of explains why the city was so concentrated right here for a while before ever really expanding. But there's a whole other aspect to why people lived in these areas. This is an elevation map of modern day Tokyo, and it can tell us a lot about not just the placement of the castle, but the layout of the city.
Tokyo is divided between the low city and the high city. The low city is basically the eastern side, which is floodplains, things like that. The western side of the city is called the Yamanote, which literally means fingers of the mountain.
This is Tristan Greno, who's an expert on Tokyo's history. And a lot of this light blue that you see in Tokyo today was actually water when Edo began. So that means that Edo Castle right here was placed right where the water meets the land.
The Edo Castle was just built literally on the end of one of these fingers of the mountain.
They could have a great view of the sea from there, probably over there.
It's also interesting because you can see kind of why these waterways would have been dug where they were. And like I said, it wasn't just these waterways that the shogun started to make. He also began to make land.
You're literally digging up, massive amounts of earth. And so you have to put it somewhere.
Most of the town in Edo, lower area used to be wetland. He reclaimed almost all the Edo town.
I also want to point out this peninsula right here because this is what is now known as Ueno Park.
We are here in the peninsula, and this is the tip of the peninsula and the sea. Look at this. It is higher, more than 50 meters about. If you see this gap between under and higher place, you can imagine that, most of these places are just under the sea.
The lower areas were much more prone to flooding, so those who had the means to left to the more valuable higher ground.
Upper people live in upper place, and lower people live in the lower place.
And you can see this little remnant of water here that was left behind as the land was built around. This park is visible right here on this map and is actually home to a shrine that was built to sort of protect the city from that unlucky east direction, just like the samurai were.
The construction of town or city is different from the West and Japan. That's why we don't have any concept of, a wall to protect whole the cities here in Japan.
But one thing they tried very carefully to avoid was any big long streets leading straight up to the castle.
Despite being built as a defensive castle town, Edo was actually not attacked for more than 200 years after its completion. In fact, most of the destruction that happened during that time came from within the city. And it has to do with the unluckiest kimono I've ever heard about. According to Wikipedia, the kimono had been owned in succession by 3 teenage girls who all died before ever being able to wear it. When the garment was being burned, a large gust of wind reportedly fanned the flames, causing the wooden temple to ignite. That is what led to the death of over 100,000 people in the Great Fire of Meraki.
In the town of Edo, we had a lot of fires very often, probably because almost all of the buildings are made of wood.
But this fire was different. It burnt 60% of the city and permanently altered what Tokyo would be. This shifted their focus from defense to that of disaster prevention.
And so once the keep of Edo Tower burns down, they never bother rebuilding it.
And as a result, the shogun allowed the residents to expand outside of the moat, quickly doubling the radius of Edo.
Many Japanese people do not recognize this place as a castle. First, because this is more recognized as an imperial palace, and second, because it doesn't have any castle tower. The most iconic thing is the tower.
So what happened that turned this castle town into modern-day Tokyo? For being the most populous city in the world, it's incredibly quiet and it's incredibly clean. Listen. Okay, there's a fan, but there's people around too. Look. It's busy. This place is awesome. The end of the Edo period was ushered in 1853. When 3 U.S. naval ships sailed into Tokyo Bay and began firing off blank cannons. This fleet belonged to Commodore Perry, with a letter in his hand from the United States President to the Emperor of Japan, even though the Emperor had no political power at the time. To me, that just shows how completely foreign these two cultures were to each other.
Well, Japan had been closed the door to other side of the world for more than 200 years, but Commodore Perry came to Japan to open 2 ports.
Perry is representative of this threat of the West.
And it was during this time that the people of Edo began to think that maybe they should start building up some defenses, and they began building odaiba, or fortresses, in the bay.
So the odaiba are the gun emplacements, right? And those are put in response to Perry's arrival, saying, well, we have to come up with some kind of defense system for the capital.
So on this map, if you look at these 2 little angular islands at the bottom here, these are actually remnants from those forts. You can tell that the land making did not stop there. And if we look at just a bit wider of a map, you can actually see that the entire airport is on made land. It's right here at the end of the Edo period where Tokyo finally gets its name. This is marked by the beginning of the Meiji Restoration, where the emperor was restored to power and moved from Kyoto to Edo.
In Japan, the concept of capital is probably different from other countries. The capital is where the emperor lives.
A letter was sent out that Edo would become the eastern capital, which translates to Tokyo. The capital was established in Edo, not moved to Edo.
Well, there's a number of questions that arise out of this very cryptic message. It's only like 2 lines long. This town that used to be called Edo is now going to be called the Eastern Capital. Kyoto is still there, which literally means capital city. Does that mean that there's still a Western capital?
Well, if you ask it to people in Kyoto, oh, he's just making a business trip to Tokyo. How long? 155 years.
But the name of the city is hardly the only thing that changed. Japan opened its borders and culture to the west and dramatically altered its trajectory. Honestly, this sparks a whole new chapter of development that deserves its own video.
So the Meiji Restoration is Japan's attempt to, as they said themselves, catch up to and surpass the West.
From the government to the culture to the urban landscape, everything began to change during the Meiji Restoration.
Food, shelter, or, everything.
The caste system was completely done away with. The samurai lost their privileges, and the families that were required to live in Edo could now move freely wherever they wanted. A lot of the architecture around the city began to change and had a bunch of Dutch influence. For example, right here is Tokyo Central Station. This train station was built at the end of the Meiji period and looks nothing like the traditional Japanese architecture that had been there for hundreds of years. Just like the Gokaido roads that connected all of Japan when the Edo period began, trains began connecting Tokyo when the Meiji Restoration began.
Tokyo is burnt down and destroyed and rebuilt from the zero multiple times.
For example, on September 1st, 1923, at 11:58 in the morning, another earthquake shook the city. There's never a good time for one, but the Great Kanto earthquake hit at a terrible time.
Right as everyone's lighting all their hibachi fires to cook lunch, basically. And so very quickly, the city is just completely consumed by fire, devastating pretty much the entire city, especially the eastern side of the city.
Because of this, and the devastating bombing during World War II, and countless other small disasters, it can be really difficult to find older buildings in the city. After the destruction that the city experienced during World War II, the economic miracle that happened in Japan completely revitalized the city. The subway began being built, the expressway that I talked about was being built, the Olympics were held, and the city has developed into what it is today, which is the largest city in the world, yet incredibly clean and surprisingly quiet. And it's right here in this city where you can be walking down the street and see some old stones that make you wonder why they're there. Thank you so much to the experts that helped me with this video. If you want to book a tour from Mr. Takada, I'm going to put a link to his site in the description. And I'm going to put a bunch of further reading, including some articles from Tristan Greno that I highly recommend you check out. Thank you so much for watching. If you're still here at this point in the video, I want to let you know that I just launched a Patreon. So if you want to support me and help me get these videos out into the world, then there is a great way to do it. And I'm going to be putting my videos ad-free on there and put some behind the scenes stuff up and build a little community there. And I really think that those involved in the Patreon community are going to help shape these videos. So if you're interested, please check it out. The link's going to be in the description. Either way, no matter what you decide to do, thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and I'll see you in another video super soon. Peace.